Warning, this episode contains graphic content that may be disturbing for some of our listeners.
All right. Well, we're really glad you found us. This is Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective. I'm Clark Donnelly, along with co-host Jessica Hemmelgarn and retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas. And occasionally we remind you that some of the cases we talk about on this podcast are not always for the faint of heart. So we're going to encourage you to exercise caution with this one. This is one where some of the material we're going to cover could be upsetting to some of our listeners and some of our viewers, but we are glad that you're with us, and we hope you stick with us through the case of Ashley Taggart. Ashley is a little girl from Ohio that was abducted in 1999, and Harry, you guys hit the ground running on this one. It was really impressive to me how quickly law enforcement authorities at every level responded to the report that Ashley went missing.
Yeah, this is really a good demonstration of law enforcement coming together, and I think it all started with the Lancaster Police Department. Great agency, very knowledgeable on how to work kidnapping cases, and that they've attended a lot of training in that, some of which I've even provided in that over the years. So when something happens, and that's really the whole idea of attending these conferences and these trainings is, if something like this would fall on your doorstep in your community, that's not the time to try to figure out what do we need to do, what resources do we have. By attending these training sessions and everybody kind of banding together, we know exactly what we need to do quickly, and you can hit the ground running, like Clark said. And the Ashley Taggart case is certainly a good example of that. And I remember it was Monday, April 26th of 99. Ashley's mom, Jennifer Peters, was getting her infant child ready to go for a visit. And Ashley, who's a 3-year-old toddler, was in the house with Jennifer and the infant. And Jennifer said, "Hey, why don't you go outside in the backyard for a few minutes and play?" She had some toys and things out there, and I'll be right out to get you. Well, Ashley goes out the door, and keep in mind, she's all of like 3'4", weighs about 40 pounds. So she's pretty small toddler. She went outside and closed the door, and Jennifer continued on with getting the infant ready. They were going to go visit Jennifer's sister down the street. And when Jennifer got the infant ready, she went outside to get Ashley, and she couldn't find her. And, she yelled for Ashley several times. Ashley went next door to some of the neighbors and said, "Hey, did you see my little girl, Ashley?" And nobody saw her. And now, as you could imagine, any mom would imagine, she's in a dire panic. And she immediately calls the Lancaster PD and tells them that her daughter is missing, and they immediately respond. And through their training in that, they knew that one of the first things you have to do is conduct a neighborhood investigation. So 2 of the officers that responded immediately started knocking on doors close to Jennifer's house, and nobody saw Ashley anywhere. After the brief neighborhood was conducted, these officers knew, hey, we need some manpower, and so contacted their Deputy Chief Jeff Gherkin and Captain Dave Bailey and said, "Hey, we've got this missing girl. We've already done a close proximity neighborhood. Nobody can find her. She might have been abducted." And so the Lancaster PD immediately sent additional officers to the scene. They made a request through channels, law enforcement channels, that we might need some additional manpower here to help us. And so different people responded from different agencies and started assisting with the Lancaster PD. And I know that I got a call. It was on my at my desk on a Monday afternoon, on that afternoon, and I got a call from the deputy chief, Gherkin, and he said, "Hey, here's what we've got. Can you help us?" And I said, "Absolutely. Here are some things that you need to immediately do, some of which they'd already started the process." And I said, "I'll be there." By this time, it was late, and they had enough manpower to do the immediate steps that they needed to do, including working with the media. And so I said, "I'll just come by. I'll come there for your briefing in the morning. I'll bring copies of the FBI's child abduction response plan and share it with the all the detectives and that there, and we'll talk about our next steps in that." So the next morning, I made a 65-minute drive to Lancaster, and when I arrived, it was in time for the briefing. I was introduced to some of the detectives that I had not met before, but a lot of them I had already worked with over the years. And we talked about, that time is really of the essence. We had a situation here where, when a child is taken, presumably by a stranger, the first 3 hours are the most critical. Those hours have already passed, but they've already done a neighborhood canvas. They're doing everything that they can. It's important for people, I think, to understand that even though the first 3 hours are the most important, usually law enforcement talks about a 72-hour window that is the most critical overall time frame. If you can't locate that child within the first 72 hours, you're most likely not gonna get that child back alive. And why do people kidnap? Why do strangers kidnap? Really for one main reason, and that's for the purpose of having sex with that child. And I mean, I know it's hard for most people to imagine that, there are people out there that would want to have sex with a toddler and that, but unfortunately, I've had cases where infants have been sexually molested, and that blows my mind that anything like that could happen. But unfortunately, we have people out there that do that, and so
My stomach is like curling
yeah.
up. Like I'm physically like, ugh, I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, any parent, again, this is not normal behavior, and it's just repulsive to the core. And but unfortunately, again, like a lot of things we see in our world, it happens, even though it's
And that
horrible.
must be hard for you to investigate and other law enforcement who have families and children. That's got to be intense.
You're immediately, everybody relates to. Some people have children that are maybe Ashley's age or have babies at home, and the fact that you've got sick people out there that have some mental health issues and that are that can do some of these things. No wonder we safeguard our children like we do. Most people, because of our past experience in hearing about these cases. So, I think everybody relates to it. Even if your children are grown, you remember what it was like when they were that age, and it's heartbreaking when things like that happen. So we wanted to go back and redo the neighborhood canvas. This time we wanted to send out teams of 2. And I think it's really important for people to understand that reason why we do that, again, we've talked about this in other episodes, but you really have to have a 2-pronged investigation. And so part of the investigation, you have to eliminate the family. And we were in the process in Ashley's case of eliminating the family as being suspects. So we were already starting the process of the 2-pronged investigation, trying to, number one, eliminate the family because they're the ones that had last contact with the child as far as we know. And we were setting up polygraph examinations, not only for Jennifer, the mom, but the father of Ashley, who Jennifer and the father did not live together, but they had a friendly arrangement, friendly relationship in that. And so the team wanted to go and talk to the dad as soon as possible to find out if by chance Ashley was with the father. And once that was eliminated, then we wanted to polygraph both Jennifer and the father to make sure again that they were being truthful. So that's one part of the investigation that's going on. And in that as well, we're trying to come up with a clear picture of the missing child. And this is something that I want to mention because so many times when I've worked kidnapping cases or missing children cases in the past, you can't, some families don't have a picture of their child. It never ceases to amaze me. I think most people have pictures of their children, as they're growing up. This is little Johnny, standing in the hallway. Here's little Johnny taking a bite of cereal. Here's little Johnny scratching his head. I mean, you got all kinds of pictures typically of these children, but believe it or not, there are families that don't take photos of their children. And the children only appear accidentally. Like if there's a party going on somewhere, the child might be in the background. And so investigators have to crop the child's picture out. And it's again more frequent than you would think, that we really have to work hard to get some type of a clear picture of the child.
Is this prior to cell phones too? Like I think about like when I was growing up, we had like you had to bring out the camera or have a disposable camera. So I was trying to think about that during this case too.
Yeah, clearly more so now you'll find pictures of the child, but back in the day and maybe even now, again, I haven't been working kidnapping cases for a little while, but with the use of the cell phone camera and that, you'll probably have more access to pictures of children. But again, the point is that taking pictures of your children isn't apparently a priority for everyone, like a lot of us do. One prong of the investigation is again ongoing, eliminating the family. Both Jennifer and her boyfriend, the father of Ashley, were polygraphed. They passed with flying colors. They were never really suspected of having anything to do with the disappearance of Ashley, but you have to check it anyway. But the second part of that is the intensive neighborhood canvass, because someone like Ashley doesn't have access to a vehicle, or a bicycle. So chances are very good that she's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood and somebody saw her and decided to take advantage of her being by herself. So we wanted to go back and redo the neighborhood canvas, and you send teams of 2 out. The reason why we do that is, number one, if you knock on the door of a kidnapper and they feel like that they're involved and they're going to go away to prison for a long time, you don't know how they're going to react. People that are facing a long prison term may decide, hey, I'm going to shoot it out with the police or do whatever I need to do to get away. You knock on the door, you ask the person inside the residence, you identify yourself, you tell them that you're investigating the missing child case. Can I come in and can we come in and talk to you about, ask you some questions? Most people will be more than happy to let you in, and they're concerned about the missing child as well as the investigators are. So when you're inside, again, the idea of having 2 people is, one is asking the questions of the person that lives there, all the logical questions that need to be asked, while the second person is observing that individual's body language to make sure that they seem to be calm and they're not appearing to hide anything. They're also looking around in the residence to see covertly while they're sitting there, looking around to see if there's any signs that the child may have been there or was still there now. And so those 2 things are going on at the same time. and an extensive neighborhood was conducted by these teams. In addition to that, there were over 150 volunteer searchers that met at the police department. And since the law enforcement agencies were covering the immediate neighborhood, they were asked to search beyond the immediate neighborhood, any fields, any outbuildings that might be out there, any place at all where a child could have maybe have wandered or somebody could try to hide the child. So we had all these volunteers, and I want to just mention, this is when a child goes missing, this is one of the best things about our communities. You can have differences. You might be on different ends of the political spectrum. Whatever the situation is, when a child goes missing, everybody forgets all that. It's all focused on trying to recover that child, because we all have children and we know what it's like to have, or we can think about what it would be like to have a child missing. And so everybody's there working together. So we've got these teams of law enforcement officers. We've got over 150 volunteers that are all out searching for Ashley. And during the neighborhood canvass, the officers are really looking for not only obvious signs of Ashley, but is there anybody that appears to be a little concerning, maybe a little bit off, maybe like they're trying to hide something? And if someone comes off that way, acts a little strange, acts a little weird, they make note of that. And then at the end of the afternoon, after the neighborhood canvass is done, we met back at the police department and we went through the neighborhood canvass. What we saw, was there anybody that stuck out during your canvass that you talked to that maybe needs to have a second look? And one of the teams that had gone out indicated that when they knocked on the door of Jason Wagner, who lived less than a football field away from the Taggart residence, he seemed to be cooperative. He let him in, but he just seemed odd. He just, there was something about Jason that gave the investigators, a bad feeling about him. And so they noted that. And when they came back to the meeting, the debriefing at the end of the afternoon, Jason Wagner was one of the ones that was mentioned as, I think we need to do another closer look at this guy, because he seemed to be a little off and there was something going on there. And so the team started, that was assigned to him, started digging up information about Wagner. And, again, he was down the street from where Ashley went missing. They found out that there was also another guy, Danny Taylor, that lived at the home with Jason. And ironically, Danny had a small female child already living there at the home. And according to Jason, because Danny wasn't there when the original investigators went to talk to him, Jason said that Danny had custody of the small child because the mom was a prostitute and had a severe drug problem. So Danny received the official custody for the time being anyway. So that's why Danny he was actually from a different state, but he brought the child to Ohio, to the Lancaster area, to be closer to his mother, who could help out with the child periodically. So, and then somehow Danny had met Jason in this other state, and Jason came with them and moved into the same house with Danny. Danny was aware that Jason had some mental health issues, and he was also aware that Jason had a charge of a gross sexual imposition against a child in another state, and yet that didn't seem to bother Danny. And
Wait, what? Like, I have to pause there for a second, because the gears don't seem to be clicking correctly.
Yes, exactly. The investigators couldn't understand how if Danny knew that Jason had a prior sex charge, with related to a young child, how, he
How
would
could he
let,
bring another young child
yeah,
into this
how would he let
man's space?
exactly. And there were times that Wagner was home alone with that child. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But, it was all very confusing to the investigators. And that's why they wanted to go back, and they wanted to talk to Danny Taylor himself and see if, what the story was. And so they asked Jason where Danny was, and he said, well, he might be here, he might be there. The investigators tried to go and find Danny, but they couldn't find him that day. So they made it a point that they were going to go talk to him the next day. So the investigators, again, knew they needed to talk to Danny to see what his story was. And by this time, there were over 100 tips that had come in for the Lancaster PD, so everybody's overwhelmed with trying to follow up on these tips. We
And
have
as we've mentioned in previous episodes, every tip needs to be followed. So every tip, regardless of how serious you think it is, needs to be investigated. So you've got a lot on your hands.
Absolutely. Again, you never know which tip is going to lead to the successful resolution of the case. And so each tip has to be followed. Even when you look at the tip, sometimes you go, oh, there's no way that's going to be crucial to the case. But sometimes it turns out that it is. And so you really need to give every tip a good effort and make sure that you follow up on each one. In addition to all the people that were searching and the investigators that are out doing the neighborhoods, the media was absolutely all over this case. Anytime there's a missing child, they're bringing reporters, satellite trucks to the scene. Of course, we always get psychics. I've never had a psychic that actually helped out on a case, but hey, they're well-meaning. They're trying to help out and that. So, I mean, you listen to them, but all I can say is I've never had one that actually was able to help me out on a case, but so be it. So we looked at other kinds of disappearances maybe that have been in the area that were unsolved. We had one that we were looking at where an individual was a young lady, about 9 years old, was abducted and was missing in Kettering, Ohio. But the distance was too great. It was over 107 miles away. The other girl was older. Ashley's just a toddler. And so it just, didn't seem like they were connected in any way, shape, or form.
And we'll talk about that case in another episode.
Yeah, we certainly will, and that's a sad and interesting case in itself. By now, Wednesday, again, the missing Ashley went missing on Monday. It's now Wednesday, and
So
we
we're
started
at 48 hours approximately.
right. We're coming up on the 72.
That number scares me.
Yeah.
And Harry, why is that number so scary
Well,
for those
again,
that haven't heard before?
Uh, working child abduction cases over the years, and most investigators will tell you that that window, first of all, the first 3 hours is critical, but if beyond that, the first 72 hours, typically, if an offender is going to abduct a child, that child is usually dead within the first 72 hours. And so you have to do everything you can to, as quickly as possible, conduct these investigations. And here we are now, it's Wednesday. We're going to be coming up on that 72-hour window. And, if you have no sign of your missing child, especially at the tender age of that Ashley was, 3 years old, it's not looking good that you're going to be able to get her back alive. And, that's just that time frame just puts additional pressure on you to, to do everything you can as quickly as you can to try to find that child. And as I mentioned, Jason Wagner was somebody that stood out. And so the investigators were going to go back and not only re-talk to Jason, but to try to locate Danny, and which they had not been successful at. And so we had a team doing that, trying to track those leads down. And lo and behold, I'm out conducting, helping out on the canvas, and I run into Jason Wagner myself. And
Whoa.
Wow. Okay.
I'm walking down the alley and with another investigator, and lo and behold, Jason's standing out by the alley behind his house, and I engage
So
him in
they're fairly close to Ashley's. You're sharing an alley now. Yeah.
there's an alley that runs at the end of behind Ashley's residence, Jennifer's residence, and Jason is at another end of the alley there, less than 100 yards away. So, it's fairly close. And so I see Jason and I start talking to him. I introduce myself to him, ask him a few questions. He answered them. He never gave any indication that he was hiding anything. But I also got that weird vibe from him just in talking with him. And I knew that we had investigators that were going to go back and talk to him. So I just left it go at that. I didn't try to, continue the conversation with Jason. I just was continued on with what I was doing, knowing that he was going to be re-interviewed here any moment. All of this is going on. We still can't find Danny. The investigators spend the rest of the day trying to track all the 100 plus leads down. The searchers are still out there looking for Ashley. Maybe if she was able to get away, maybe went into a wooded area or by a pond or any of these things. Somehow made it into an outbuilding of some kind. So the searchers were still out, and Wednesday ended. It got dark, and we still hadn't located Ashley, and we hadn't located Danny yet either. And so on Thursday, the investigators went back to Jason's house to talk to him again. And this time they were a little more forceful and trying to track down Danny, and said, "Where is Danny now? We need to know where Danny is." Jason said he's probably at his mom's house. So investigators asked Jason a few more questions. Jason told the investigators that he had a prior arrest for gross sexual imposition. And so it just confirmed the information that the investigators had suspected, that he might have had some involvement. So the investigators that were assigned to Jason went back and talked to him on Thursday, and again, tried to be a little more forceful, wanted to look around a little bit more. Again, Jason was giving off some bad vibes, but there was no indication that Ashley was there or had been there. And as the investigators are talking to Jason, he admits that he had a prior conviction for gross sexual imposition on a minor when he lived in Coshocton, Ohio. And
Whoa.
this floored the detectives, because they had run his criminal history before and didn't see anything that popped up, or they didn't know that that Jason had this prior arrest. And
Not
so
possible. Now there's sex offender registries and you can go online and look these things up. So how is that in 1999 not a possible thing that they would know?
his convictions, and actually it turned out to be two convictions.
Ooh.
The investigators went back and ran his criminal history. Two prior arrests for gross sexual imposition with a minor came up, and they had already checked, the investigators had checked the the known sex offenders around the area and that, and Jason's name had never come up. And so they were a little confused about how they didn't know that Jason had committed these crimes against children. And
I'm
apparently,
confused too.
yeah,
I'm
A
very
lot of people
confused.
are.
this was before there was a law that was enacted apparently after Jason was convicted of these two, called Megan's Law, that required individuals who had been convicted for sex-related offenses against children to be register with the local sheriff's office to tell them that, hey, I've been arrested before, and I'm required to inform you of that. Jason's convictions were before that law was enacted, so he wasn't required to at that point.
Whoa, like a
Okay.
loophole.
So yeah, that's why the investigators didn't know about this. But when they went back and they contacted the Coshocton County Sheriff's Office and asked some questions of the sheriff's office in Coshocton as to what happened in Jason Wagner's case, Coshocton was able not only to talk about the one case, but a second offense as well. So now the investigators know that this individual has already been convicted of some kind of a sex assault against a child. And
And he
that
has easy access and he's acting suspicious.
And yeah, exactly. And they now are absolutely more convinced than ever that there's a good possibility that Jason's involved. So Jason had told them that Danny was over at his mother's house. They made a beeline to Danny's mother's house and, in fact, found Danny there and started interviewing him. And the investigators were asking questions about, have you heard about Ashley's disappearance? And Danny said, yeah, I'm familiar with it. I've heard about it on the media, but I haven't seen any indication that she's been around our house. I haven't seen or heard anything that would lead me to believe that Jason's involved in any way. So after the investigators confirmed with the Coshocton County Sheriff's Office that, in fact, Jason had not one, but two prior arrests for gross sexual imposition, they knew that they had to talk to Danny Taylor as fast as possible because he may hold some key information about any activity that could have occurred involving Jason at their house. When the detectives made a beeline to Taylor's house, to Taylor's mother's house. And when they arrived, they found Taylor there. Danny told them about how he met Jason in Florida, befriended him. He knew that Jason had some mental health issues. He also indicated that the reason why he had custody of the little girl was because the little girl's mother was a prostitute and had a severe drug issue. And so the court gave Danny the child. And when that happened, they wanted to move to Ohio to be closer to Danny's mother. So Danny's mother could help take care of the child and that. So that's why they were living where they were, and they had good, easy access to Danny's mother to help with the child. And so they continued to ask Danny some questions about, have you noticed anything at all that was going on in the residence that indicated that Ashley was possibly there? And Danny was saying, no, I mean, I haven't, I'm aware of the Ashley disappearing and I've seen it on the news, but I haven't seen any indication at all that she's been at our house and that, or that Jason had anything to do with it. And they said, well, is there anything else that, you'd like to tell us? I mean, have you heard anything? And Danny says, it's strange, but 2 nights ago, he said, I was in bed with Jason, and we're laying there, and we heard scratching coming from the attic.
What?
And we heard scratching coming from the attic. Jason got up, climbed up the ladder to go into the attic. Jason was up there for a few minutes, and then the scratching stopped. And Jason came back down and said it must have been rats.
Danny.
Yeah. So now, here the investigators are, they're like, they know that Jason's got two prior arrests for gross sexual imposition against a child. Now there's scratching coming from the attic. This is just too weird. So they go back to the LPD, the Lancaster PD, and they tell the chief deputy and others that they truly believe that they need to hit Jason and Danny's house. They need to do a search. They need to get a search warrant because there are some indications that Ashley may be at that house right now. And so the Chief Deputy Gherkin and Captain Bailey decided to head back to the Wagner residence and asked some of the other detectives to work on getting a search warrant and to meet them at the Wagner residence as soon as they had the search warrant. Gherkin and Bailey head back to Wagner's house, and they're sitting there talking to Jason Wagner. And now they're looking around a little bit more. Jason starts to get nervous a little bit because he can tell that the investigators are a little bit nervous with him. Jason decides that he needs something to distract the investigators. So he goes over to the TV and he turns the TV on and he turns up the volume really loud.
That's
It's
weird.
almost like he was trying to cover potential sounds that might be coming. The investigators asked him to turn the TV down, and about that time, the other detective showed up at the house with a search warrant. They went ahead and executed the search warrant. They made Jason walk him around the house, and when they got to one of the rooms, there was a ladder that led up to the attic, and it had been nailed shut. And so, but investigators saw like little telltale signs of insulation that had fallen down. It looked like it was recent. And so they thought somebody's been up in that attic here recently. And, with Danny telling us that there was scratching noises coming from up there, knowing that Jason had these two prior convictions, they decided to go ahead and make entrance into the attic. Rather than disturbing the regular entrance to the attic, they wanted to preserve that to be able to process that and maybe pull fingerprints and things off, showing who went up into the attic. So they cut a hole next to the original entrance to the attic, and Deputy Chief Gherkin went up the ladder and stuck his head up there. And when he did, he could see what appeared to be clothing very similar to what Ashley was wearing at the time. And
Oh my.
Deputy Chief Gherkin is telling Captain Bailey, said, I see some clothing up here. I need to go up there to make to look around a little bit better. Why don't you come up with me? And as Captain Bailey's going up the ladder, Jason puts his hands on his head and says, sometimes I do terrible things.
Oh, no.
What?
So you can imagine what these detectives are thinking as they're going up into the attic, and as they move, they see something at the far end of the attic, laying between the rafters, and they make their way down. Deputy Chief Gherkin is first, and he sees what appears to be a little girl's body.
Oh, no.
Laying there, and he tells Captain Bailey, I think I see Ashley, or I see a little girl up here. And as he's crawling along, he's got his little flashlight on and he's shining it into the little girl's face. He thinks she's dead, but all of a sudden her eyes start to flicker because of the light from the flashlight. And he yells, "She's alive." And they both
Oh, thank
rush
God.
rushed to the end of the attic where apparently Ashley was duct taped. She had duct tape across her mouth. Her hands and her feet were duct taped, so she couldn't move. She was naked except for her panties. Um, and they immediately call for a squad and for medical attention. They take the duct tape off of Ashley's mouth, and she immediately, says, "I want a Coke." and,
Oh,
and apparently she was so thirsty and so dehydrated. Anyway, the squad shows up. They take her to the hospital, obviously, for treatment, get her something to drink, and they indicate that during the examination of her,
I'm gonna stop. Discretion. If
okay,
it's just a trigger warning, I'm gonna warn people now. Go on, Harry. What did they indicate in the report?
hold on one second.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I just know what you're gonna say, so I was like,
Yeah.
trigger warning.
Okay. Yeah, so they rush Ashley to the hospital, and during the examination, they found out that she was so severely dehydrated that she could have died within the next couple of hours.
oh my
And
goodness.
they also indicated that she, in fact, had been sexually assaulted. So it was wonderful that they were able to recover her and she was still alive. But, the trauma that poor little girl went through was just awful. And they took Wagner back to the station, to the police department, and they continued to interview him. Jason refused to admit his involvement, but and he claimed he had blackouts and didn't remember everything. But he did tell the detectives that he remembers feeding Ashley while she was in the attic. So,
Hmm.
that was a great admission that he made that indicated that Jason knew that in fact Ashley was up there and had actually taken some steps to keep her up there and was feeding her up there. While Ashley's still at the hospital after her examination, obviously the Lancaster PD notifies the parents that she's been recovered and she's at the hospital and that she's alive. Uh, and it seemed like just about everybody in the community knew all at once because they saw the activity at Jason's house and then they saw the squad, leaving and going to the hospital. So it was like everybody in the community knew that something big had happened. And then the Lancaster PD notified the media that Ashley had been recovered alive and that they were going to charge Jason Wagner with her disappearance, with her kidnapping. And on Friday, May 7th, Wagner was indicted in Fairfield County Common Pleas Court on 3 counts of kidnapping, 1 count each of attempted murder, abduction, felonious assault, rape, child endangering, robbery, and possession of criminal tools. I'm not sure how the robbery and the possession of criminal tools fits in, something that I'm not aware of, but that was part of the indictment that was obtained on Friday, May 7th. Wagner's roommate, Danny Taylor, was eventually charged with child endangering for allowing Wagner to have access and be alone with the 2-year-old little girl that Danny had brought from Florida. and was living now at the Wagner, Danny Taylor and Jason Wagner's residence. And Taylor received a sentence of 1 year in prison for that. And the little girl was removed from his custody and placed in foster care until the little girl's mother had recovered sufficiently enough to be able to take care of her own child. And so,
Can I ask a question? Was
sure.
that little girl okay? Do you ever know if she was hurt as well? Or was that?
Yeah, to my knowledge, there was no indication that she had been sexually assaulted. Um, I can't tell you more than that. So, I mean, anything else would be speculation. But what I had
Yes.
heard was that Danny Taylor was eventually arrested, charged with the endangering, allowing Wagner to have access, and he received a sentence of 1 year in prison. Haven't heard anything more about that little girl. Wagner was interviewed by several psychologists. They had different opinions about whether or not Wagner suffered from mental illness or not. A third opinion was needed to guide the court. In October of '99, forensic psychologist Jeffrey Smalden of Columbus, who happened to be the same psychologist that interviewed Thomas Dillon in one of my
Which
other
is,
cases.
yeah, which is another episode of this
Another
podcast. Yes.
episode coming up. He participated in the evaluation of Wagner, and he believed that Wagner was able to understand the nature of his charges and assist in his defense. So trial was scheduled to begin on December 6th of '99. Up until that time, investigators and prosecutors continued to work on preparing for trial. And finally, on February 2nd, 2000, a deal was reached. Wagner pleaded guilty to 5 felonies and to kidnapping, rape, child endangering, felonious assault, and possession of criminal tools. He pleaded no contest to the attempted murder charge. And before Wagner's plea could be accepted, Deputy Chief Gherkin read to the court the facts of the case and the horrible ordeal that Ashley had been through. Apparently, there were many people in the courtroom and not a dry eye in the courtroom as Deputy Chief Gherkin read the statement. The judge agreed that he would accept Wagner's pleas. He determined that, in fact, Wagner was a danger to society and he was to be labeled a violent sex predator. And they continued on. Monday, February 28th. Wagner was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 44 years. Wagner apologized in court for what he had done. And the judge told him in the court, he said, life is like baseball, 3 strikes and you're out. And so they sending Jason away for a long time. Not long after Wagner was sentenced in May of 2000, the Lancaster PD received 2 national awards, one from the Department of Justice and one from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, for the outstanding effort that the entire Lancaster PD had put in, all of the men and women involved, and all the Lancaster citizens that came out to bring Ashley home. So it was clearly a national case that the Lancaster PD just did a fantastic job with, and were able to bring Ashley home, which doesn't always happen. I've worked a number of kidnapping cases where, unfortunately, we haven't been able to bring the kids home alive. So this is a credit to the Lancaster PD and all of the citizens of Lancaster. When the judge said that Jason was going to spend pretty much the rest of his life in prison, the judge was right, but Jason's stay in prison was over much before he had served any of that, really any significant time, because on November 13th of 2000, so just a few months after he was sentenced to prison, Wagner was beaten to death by a fellow inmate.
Oh my.
Serving
Man.
serving time at the Warren Correctional Institution. So Wagner is no longer with us. I have not heard anything about Ashley. I pray that she's doing well and that she's fully recovered. Again, all kudos go to the Lancaster PD for their action, and my hat's off to the citizens of Lancaster for coming together and working to help bring Ashley home. Just a kind of it's a horrible case, but a good ending, I think, for the most part, all
Yeah.
things considered.
I don't want to get into anything and where you would speculate, but just in all of your conversations with the various law enforcement agencies and officers involved in this, did you ever hear how the actual abduction was carried out? Obviously, Jason was a neighbor. He must have been aware of Ashley in the neighborhood at some point, and it occurred to him to abduct her. But just out of curiosity, did he use a vehicle? Did you ever find out how she disappeared from that backyard in such a short time?
Yeah, what I recall is Ashley was a victim of opportunity. Jason happened to be outside. Some speculate. Again, I'm only basing this on what I think I've heard. Again, this was 23 years ago, so 24 years ago. So my memory's a little clouded as far as that goes. But what I recall was that Jason saw Ashley outside in the backyard, just off the alley. And I don't know if Jason was walking down the alley at that time or what, but somehow managed to get Ashley to go with him back to his house, and that's how the abduction actually occurred. There's another story out there. I'm just not aware of it, but
Yeah.
that's what I recall happening.
And it's worth noting that true stranger abductions like this one are extremely rare, but always of concern because often they do not end happily, as Ashley's case did. And to get back to what Jessica asked earlier, there have been a lot of laws passed in the last 30 years or so to protect children and to make sexual predators more accountable, to help law enforcement and even civilians know where those sexual offenders live. But just to acquaint listeners with the timeline, when Ashley was abducted, the Megan's Law, which requires the sexual offenders to register, was in effect. But when Jason Wagner was convicted of his crime, it was not. Then in 2006, the law was strengthened. And that may be the one that a lot of people are familiar with. It is the Sexual Offender Registration and Notification Act. And that strengthened that law even more so and applied it in a universal sense so that all states and all jurisdictions sort of have the same similar regulations. And so a lot has been done since the Ashley Taggart case to make the kids out there safer and make it easier for law enforcement to investigate these crimes. Cassie, I know this was one that it's really hit home to you.
Oh,
What
yeah.
are your takeaways from this story? What do you take away from this story of the Ashley Taggart?
Well, as a mother of two young kids, it was hard to hear. And as we were preparing for this podcast, I really struggled. I know that when we talked about this podcast initially, if you haven't figured it out already, I'm not a huge true crime fan. Nothing against it. It's just not for me. And so when we talked about this podcast, I had to really think about I think I asked Harry, maybe I didn't ask you, I read how many of your cases actually involve children, because for me, it hits a nerve that I know can make me pretty anxious in general. But I am relieved to hear that random stranger abductions are rather rare in and of themselves. And I always have heard about Megan's Law because of the timing and my age. So that was kind of really interesting to me that if you had had a conviction prior to Megan's Law, it could be almost a loophole. Harry, do you think there are this is all speculation again, are there a lot of cases like Jason's where they were convicted prior to Megan's Law that could be out there that we just don't know about? Or are they usually end up coming back through the system?
That's a good question. Again, it's speculation. I don't know if that loophole was closed. We had Clark was mentioning that there has been some strengthening of Megan's Law, and I don't know if that requires if it closes that loophole that people that were convicted prior to Megan's Law still have to register. I don't know if that loophole has been closed. But I know that in today's world, if you're convicted of any kind of a crime against a child, a sex crime of any kind, you are required to register. And I think, so that's the good part, I guess, of where we are today. Again, I just don't know where we are around that.
But it
And
is
another,
important to note that parents now have a lot more access to that information. Parents, family, schools, the law, as you mentioned, Clark, is strengthened. So there's
yes.
even limitations about where, if you've been convicted of such a crime, where you can live.
Mhm.
There are maps, and all of that is really accessible now. So
Yeah.
that does make me, as a parent, feel stronger and a little safer, and glad that we have those in place. Clark,
Yeah.
you wanted to add in there.
I just wanted to add another point of historical perspective, and that is if this had happened 10 years later, an Amber Alert would have been issued. But at the time that Ashley Taggart was abducted, the Amber Alert had not been started in Ohio. And it was, in fact, so new that I'm not sure it existed anywhere but Texas. But if you were thinking all along, why wasn't an Amber Alert issued? They didn't have a system to do that in Ohio in 1999, and now we do, and have had for about 20 years now. And that's another thing that might have helped keep Ashley a little bit safer from the ordeal that she went through. But boy, a very disturbing case to hear about, and just really grateful that it had a happy ending. And that's thanks to the efforts of the law enforcement community there in Ohio at all levels, federal, state, and local, county.
Harry, can I ask you one question? You mentioned that Jason was killed while he was serving time by another inmate. And I have heard stories about how sexual offenders are treated in prisons. And I was wondering if like we all have heard the story that other prisoners are not kind to those who have committed sexual offenses. And so my question for you is that just a rumor? Is that something you know about as a law enforcement officer, or do you not know much about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely accurate. People do not take kindly, prisoners do not take kindly to somebody who's committed crimes against children. And there's kind of a hierarchy in prison. You got certain classes of prisoners, and of course there's gangs involvement and all of those kinds of things are still present in prison, believe it or not. But it's kind of a universal rule or law, if you will, in prison is you don't, if you've committed crimes against a child, you're going to have a world of hurt in prison. People do not take kindly to that. It's okay to kill and assault adults, but you don't mess with kids. And so those prisoners that happen to be there on in prison on children related crimes are probably going to feel the wrath of the prisoners.
And it might be worth mentioning also that one of the three psychologists who examined Jason Wagner prior to trial mentioned that he had been a victim of abuse himself as a young child, might have been a contributing factor to him committing the crimes that he committed, but not a mitigating factor when it came to putting him on trial and sending him to prison.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's I've heard that before. I've had a number of cases where um, the offender is looking for things to put on their side of the ledger, maybe that will help lessen the penalty that they have, and I see it commonly brought up that the offender had, a rough childhood, maybe was sexually abused, whatever the case is, and you know, I I do feel some pity for that particular person, but I also want to point out there are a lot of people that have similar type backgrounds, experiences, and maybe even worse, who do not commit crimes. And so I think it's important to point out that just because you've had a rough life doesn't necessarily translate into now, you're going to go out and commit crimes or similar things. And I just, again, yeah, you had a rough life, but you kind of made the choices that you're making now on your own. And so whether you want to use that as an excuse or not, I guess if you want to accept that as an excuse, that's up to you. But still, there's plenty of people out there that went through similar or worse situations and they turn out to be great citizens. And so it's not an automatic blanket excuse, in my opinion.
All right. Okay. I meant to
Yeah.
mention that because people will ask every now and then, well, did you ever find out why this person committed the crime? And that was as close as we ever got to motive was, he had been abused
And it
but
was a
not
crime
enough,
of opportunity, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I was asking that and it became kind of obvious through the course of your description that, oh yeah, he lived down the alley and he was a child molester and she was a child. And so more likely, yep, he just saw an opportunity, grabbed her.
Yeah,
It blows my mind, off the record. It blows my mind that he didn't hurt the other girl.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
I'm just telling you that I don't know if he did. So
Yeah. But it blows my mind that it wasn't obvious that he was hurting the other girl too.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
you've got a kid right there. I'm glad
that he'd have been charged if there was any evidence that he would have been charged with that in addition to the other.
Right. You would think so. And
yeah.
And it came up because they obviously looked into Danny and the fact that he allowed that 2-year-old girl to be in a home with Jason and fully aware of what Jason's history is.
Exactly. Registry or
Are
no.
they partners? I was trying to figure that out because you said they were in bed together, but then I was like, but he's abusing little girls. So I'm just really confused about
I am too.
all of that. I mean, I wasn't going to ask it. It's not relevant to the case, but I was like, what is happening? Like, why are you living with this guy? Like, what connection do you have?
Yeah.
We don't understand.
Somehow they met each other in Florida and they struck up a relationship, whatever kind of relationship that is. They both moved to, all three of them, the little girl included, moved to Ohio to be closer to Danny's mother. And I mean,
frankly, and Danny is one of the more gullible people I think we've heard about on this podcast.
Yeah.
Seriously, rats, Danny. 2 days after a little girl down the alley goes missing, rats in your attic?
I know.
Yeah, in your attic. Maybe under the floorboards. That I buy.
Yeah.
I had mice under the floorboards. That is a really uncomfortable sound.
We've had raccoons and bats and things.
Yeah.
But nobody nails the attic door shut.
And then I was like, why'd he nail it? Does he just want it to look like no one goes up there? Like, that doesn't make sense.
I don't know, at least.
Yeah, I think that was the thing. I think once Jason saw that the investigators were eyeballing him and had come back a couple of times to talk to him, he probably got the feeling at that point that he needed to take steps to make it appear as though nobody could go up into the attic, so there's no reason to look there.
Which just had the opposite effect.
Yeah, and then if he would have cleaned up the insulation, then they might not. I don't know if they would have decided that they need to get up into the attic with it being nailed shut. I mean, I don't know, but clearly the fact that he didn't clean up after himself there is a good indication that he wasn't thinking. Criminals They're not always dumb, but they're not always smart either.
Jesse, there are always a lot of additional material, photos and things like that go along with these cases. You hear them or you're watching this on YouTube. If you want to know more, you want to see anything more, where can they find those photos and other documents that we've got?
Absolutely. So if you're looking for additional documents like photos of the people involved in the cases, some of the evidence, you can find them on our Instagram. It's at Off the Record FBI. If you want to listen to the podcast, you can always listen on your favorite podcast streaming platforms. You can also listen on YouTube. And I should mention that when we are all doing events or all together, we also post about that too on our Instagram too. So we went to an event and you'll see all us in real person. Our height differences are drastic. You will see it doesn't look like that on if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening, but we are you are looking at two over 6 feet tall men and a 5 foot tall woman,
Uh,
and it is
So-
quite drastic.
yes, heads turn when we walk through a room for a variety of
Yes.
reasons.
Yeah.
And so if you are listening to this or watching us for the first time, or you're a regular viewer or listener, we appreciate that. Like and share and let everybody know and subscribe so that you can help build what is becoming an international audience for Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective. Until next time, I'm Clark Donnelly for Jessica Hamilgard with retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you.
Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective is created and hosted by Clark Donnelly, Harry Trombitas, and Jesse Hummelgard. Produced by Jesse Hummelgard. Stories in this podcast are inspired by Harry Trombitas' autobiography, Dark Places, about his time in the FBI. Music is called Cruise in the Back and is available on Storyblocks. You can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and on our website.